With Sam Darnold out recovering from mononucleosis, Trevor Siemian was next up to be the Jets quarterback. As you've probably seen by now after a hit from Myles Garrett, Siemian suffered a really nasty looking ankle injury, but somehow managed to walk off the field on his own and not break any bones. Welcome back everybody. For those new, my name is Brian and I'm a doctor and a sports fan, and this channel is your #1 resource for learning everything about sports medicine and different sports injury topics. Today we're going to be reviewing what exactly happened with Trevor Siemian and specifically trying to talk about the mechanism of his injury and how it's possible that he could have avoided breaking any bones in the ankle. We'll review some key anatomy around the ankle, the ligaments, the bones involved in this type of injury, and then take a look at the footage to walk you through step by step in terms of what's actually going on in the ankle. Make sure and go subscribe if you like this type of content and want to stay up to date with future videos, and let's get started. The key bones we need to talk about in the ankle joint are the tibia and the fibula, which comprise the lower leg, and then in particular the talus and the calcaneus highlighted here in this picture. The primary ankle joint that we think of is the tibio-talar joint between the bottom of the tibia and the talus. If we look at this joint from the front, it's what we would characterize as a mortise style joint. My fist can represent the talus, and then the combination of the tibia and the fibula go around the talus to form that mortise. This means we have a lot of motion with pointing our toes up and pointing our toes down, but don't have very much rotational side to side mobility in the ankle because of that mortise style of pattern. The ligaments in the ankle are equally important. Starting on the outside or the lateral portion of the ankle where the fibula sits, we have a multitude of ligaments that provide stability. These ligaments are all named after the two bones that they connect, so they're much easier to remember. First off, we have the AITFL, or the anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament, running at the lower portion of this joint between the tibia and the fibula. Remember, this is the ligament injured in a high ankle sprain. Next, we have the anterior talofibular ligament, or the ATFL, running between the talus and the fibula. We then have the calcaneal fibular ligament, or the CFL, going between the calcaneus and the fibula. And then not shown in this picture, we also have a posterior talofibular ligament. If we look on the inside or medial portion of the ankle, we have the primary deltoid ligament complex, which makes up the majority of these ligaments on that side. Now, there's other structures in the ankle that provide stability to keep the joint from dislocating, in particular a capsule that goes around the ankle joint. But think of these ligaments and the bones as working the primary stabilizers of the joint. When we initially saw the injury, it looked pretty concerning for at least an ankle dislocation, and oftentimes those also come with the fracture of the tibia or the fibula. Think back to our picture looking down the front of the ankle joint where we have the talus and that mortar type pattern. You can imagine, based on that configuration, for that ankle to become dislocated, you're probably applying a lot of pressure to those bones on the outer sides. We now know that Siemian had a pure ankle dislocation and didn't suffer any fractures in the leg. This is extremely rare. One paper looked at kind of a review of how common this is and found that less than 1% of ankle dislocations don't have a fracture associated with them. And this probably explains part of why Siemian was able to walk off the field on his own. Let's go to the footage now and go through step by step to explain what's going on at different stages and where those ligaments might have failed. Starting off in the angle from the side when we see Siemian go down, I want to pause right here in this first position where his left foot has landed with the toes in the ground. This is a common position we see that can predispose you to a Liz Frank injury because of that axial load directed down through the foot and at that Liz Frank joint. We didn't hear anything about this with Siemian, but whenever you see a foot position like this, and there's especially a load that's directed down in this direction through the heel, think of a potential Liz Frank injury. As we keep going through the footage here though, I want to point out a couple of other things. So still nothing necessarily going wrong. I don't think anything's happened yet with the injury, but now we can see his body begin to come down on top of his heel, and this is where things start to go wrong. If we keep advancing, we can ultimately see how Siemian gets to a position here where his foot is flat on the ground and he's in this tremendous amount of forced dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion is when the toes come up towards the tibia, and so you can tell how small that space is between the tibia and his toes right here. Another thing about this position is it's putting excessive load on the Achilles tendon being stretched in the back of the leg. And so when I actually thought this, one of my concerns was that I hope he didn't have an Achilles tendon rupture as well. Also in this position, there's of course a lot of stress on the knee, and we worry about patellar tendon ruptures or quadriceps tendon ruptures. But the thing about this is usually that happens when the person is activating the muscle while it's being stretched. And in this position, falling to the ground, he's probably not necessarily activating that muscle, making that injury less risk. But in this position, I want you to think about how the load of his bottom is pushing on his tibia driving that tibia forward past the talus, which ultimately is part of what predisposes to the dislocation. As we continue to advance through here, we finally get to the point where we can see that ankle has gone into a severe everted position right here, where it's practically all the way out at 90 degrees. Ankle sprains and ankle dislocations more commonly happen in an inverted position where the toes are kind of curled and pointed in like you commonly roll your ankle. But this particular position is the opposite. It's an eversion injury. As we continue to run the clip here, then we can see the ankle still looks like it's dislocated. After he comes back up to the side, we can tell even in this view here that that ankle still looks like the alignment is off out of place. Part of what I want to point out with why he was able to walk off the field though is I think his ankle actually got reduced and put back in line because of how it hit Garrett on the follow through. If we keep playing this clip here as it runs through, you can see it gets to this point where it makes contact with Garrett's leg and kind of snaps back up right there. And so I think that position right here where it makes contact with Garrett's leg and then kind of snaps back up into place actually reduced or relocated his ankle so that by the time the medical personnel got out there, the ankle was already back in alignment. I mentioned how his ankle goes into an eversion position whenever it has the dislocation, and part of why that occurs, we have to look at the view from behind here. So again, as he's going down here, we can see that left leg come back. That left foot, the toes get planted and stuck directly into the ground right here. And then as he starts to come down in this position, we can see how that foot is angled out. And so it's already going into this everted position that then when that rest of that load comes down on the heel, it causes it to collapse into that eversion sort of dislocated position. I want to pull my anatomy pictures back up here as we go through this a second time to point out why this might have happened. Oftentimes when someone has an ankle dislocation, we commonly see the fibula fractured, especially if it's an eversion type of injury. That's because as we get into this position right here, where that foot is going into that eversion moment, think back to our anatomy pictures where the fibula is on the outside portion of the leg right here. If you completely push or rotate that talus outward into that external rotation like we would here, you can see how that's going to put excessive force and kind of smash the end of the fibula. This is why usually with these types of dislocations, we see a distal fibula fracture because of the way that talus is swinging outward into the fibula and causing it to fracture. But in the case of Siemian, where we don't see any fracture, we still have disruption most likely of those ligaments. And so if we go back to where those ligaments are, we have the blue representing the medial or the deltoid ligament complex on the inside. We have our high ankle ligament, the AITFL, and then we have the rest of the lateral ligament complex here on the outside. When that talus rotates outward into that external rotation, it can kind of push that fibula and tibia apart and cause that AITFL ligament to rupture. You're then pulling that medial side away, and so you make that medial ligament complex or the deltoid complex also susceptible to rupturing. On the other hand, these outer ligaments aren't being pulled and stretched as much, so sometimes those might actually be intact. It was absolutely amazing that he was able to walk off on his own weight, but I think part of that was actually because he didn't have a fracture. You can have generally loose or lax ligaments and have a dislocation and not actually really severely disrupt them. And so if things get put back in place, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but it's not gonna be the same level of pain as if you've had a full-on fracture. Depending though on the severity of the ligament damage and which of these ligaments get injured, I'd argue that it might actually be worse than just having a fracture. Bone heals pretty good, but ligaments are really tough to heal, and in the case of Siemian, it looks like he's gonna have to have surgery to repair some of these ligaments. If you remember, we saw this happen to Karis LeVert this past NBA season where he had an ankle dislocation, and I believe he only missed 3 months because he was able to come back and didn't have any other severe injuries in the ankle. But just because of the nature of all the different ligaments and specifically how they can become disruptive, this is a wide range in terms of the recovery just based on the severity of what's actually been affected. Sometimes with these pure dislocations, they can put someone in just a walking boot or a rigid boot, and they heal up just fine without any surgery in just a number of weeks to months. But of course, like we see with Siemian, if there's more severe damage or particular ligaments that are damaged, often will require some sort of surgical correction. So I hope this was educational for you and you guys learned something about the different movements of the ankle joint, the ligaments around the ankle joint, and what we think of with an ankle dislocation. Thanks as always for watching, everybody, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.